The survivors among them, some 80,000, fled toward the Danube and crossed it, thereby invading the empire. On instructions from the Emperor Valens, imperial commanders charged with defense of the frontier first disarmed the Gothic refugees, next admitted them subject to various conditions, then tried to enslave them, and finally, in AD 378, fought them, not with Roman legions, but using mercenaries recruited from other tribes. Caesar would have wept at the spectacle that followed. In battle, the mercenaries were overconfident and slack. According to Ammianus Marcellinus, Tacitus's Greek successor, the result was the most disastrous defeat encountered by the Romans since Cannae, 6 centuries earlier. Under the weight of relentless attacks by the combined barbaric tribes and the Huns, now Gothic allies, the Danube-Rhine line broke along its entire length and then collapsed. Plunging deeper and deeper into the empire, the invaders prepared to penetrate Italy. In 400, the Visigoth Alaric, a relatively enlightened chieftain and a zealous religieux, led 40,000 Goths, Huns, and freed Roman slaves across the Julian Alps. 8 years of fighting followed. Rome's cavalry was no match for the tribal horsemen. 2/3 of the imperial legions were slain. In 410, Alaric's triumphant warriors swept down to Rome itself, and on August 24th, they entered it. Thus, for the first time in 8 centuries, the Eternal City fell to an enemy army. After 3 days of pillage, it was battered almost beyond recognition. Alaric tried to spare Rome's citizens, but he could not control the Huns or the former slaves. They slaughtered wealthy men, raped women, destroyed priceless pieces of sculpture, and melted down works of art for their precious metals. That was only the beginning. 66 years later, another Germanic chieftain deposed the last Roman emperor in the West, Romulus Augustulus, and proclaimed himself ruler of the empire. Meantime, Gunderic's Vandals, Clovis's Franks, and most of all the Huns under their terrible new chieftain Attila, who had seized power by murdering his brother, ravaged Gaul as far south as Paris, paused, and plunged into Spain. In the years that followed, Goths, Alans, Burgundians, Thuringians, Frisians, Gepidi, Suevi, Alemanni, Angles, Saxons, Jutes, Lombards, Heruli, Quadi, and Magyars joined them in ravaging what was left of civilization. The ethnic tide then settled in its conquered lands, and darkness descended upon the devastated, unstable continent. It would not lift until 40 medieval generations had suffered, wrought their pathetic destinies, and passed on. The Dark Ages were stark in every dimension. Famines and plague, culminating in the Black Death and its recurring pandemics, repeatedly thinned the population. Rickets afflicted the survivors. Extraordinary climatic changes brought storms and floods which turned into major disasters because the empire's drainage system, like most of the imperial infrastructure, was no longer functioning. It says much about the Middle Ages that in the year 1500, after 1,000 years of neglect, the roads built by the Romans were still the best on the continent. Most others were in such a state of disrepair that they were unusable. So were all European harbors until the 8th century, when commerce again began to stir. Among the lost arts was bricklaying. In all of Germany, England, Holland, and Scandinavia, virtually no stone buildings, except cathedrals, were raised for 10 centuries. The serfs' basic agricultural tools were picks, forks, spades, rakes, scythes, and balanced sickles. Because there was very little iron, there were no wheeled plowshares with mold boards. The lack of plows was not a major problem in the south, where farmers could pulverize light Mediterranean soils, but the heavier earth in northern Europe had to be sliced, moved, and turned by hand. Although horses and oxen were available, they were of limited use. The horse collar, harness, and stirrup did not exist until about AD 900. Therefore, tandem hitching was impossible. Peasants labored harder, sweated more, and collapsed from exhaustion more often than their animals. Surrounding them was the vast, menacing, and at places impassable Hercynian forest, infested by boars, by bears, by the hulking medieval wolves who lurk so fearsomely in fairy tales handed down from that time, by imaginary demons, and by very real outlaws.